Subscribe to Storylab. Now let's begin. Jack Reese stood at the edge of his son's grave, the November wind cutting through his black suit like a blade. Around him, mourners dispersed in clusters, their umbrellas bobbing away like dark flowers caught in a current. His wife Leanne stood beside him, her face hidden behind a veil, her hand cold and limp in his. Danny had been 7 years old. 7 years of baseball games, bedtime stories, and morning pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. 7 years of watching this miracle grow from a wrinkled newborn into a boy who could name every planet in the solar system and wanted to be an astronaut. Now he was in a mahogany box 6 feet underground. Jack, Leanne's voice cracked. We should go. My father's waiting at the house. Jack didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the headstone, memorizing every letter of his son's name. Go ahead. I need a minute. She hesitated, then walked toward the black limousine where her father, Russell Avila, waited with practiced patience. Russell was a broad-shouldered man of 62, silver-haired and perpetually tanned, the kind of man who'd built a construction empire from nothing and never let anyone forget it. He owned half the commercial developments in the city and had politicians on speed dial. Jack watched Russell place a comforting arm around Leanne's shoulders, the picture of a grieving grandfather. The sight made Jack's jaw clench. The official story was simple. Danny had wandered onto one of Russell's construction sites 3 days ago, the Meridian Heights project downtown. He'd fallen through an unsecured floor into the basement excavation, 20 feet onto concrete. The medical examiner ruled it an accident. Case closed. But Jack Reese had spent 15 years extracting truth from people who didn't want to give it. He'd worked in black sites from Afghanistan to Thailand, learning to read bodies the way scholars read ancient texts. And when he'd viewed his son's body at the morgue, he'd seen things the medical examiner either missed or chose to ignore. The bruising on Danny's wrist was consistent with restraint, not impact. The defensive wounds on his forearms told the story of a child trying to protect himself. The angle of the cranial fracture didn't match a straight fall. Someone had beaten his son before throwing him off that floor. Jack knelt and placed his palm flat on the fresh earth. I'm going to find out who did this to you, he whispered, and then I'm going to make them wish they'd never been born. The Avila estate sprawled across 8 acres of manicured grounds in the wealthiest suburb of the city. Jack had always felt like an intruder here, even after 10 years of marriage. Leanne had grown up in this house, attended private schools, summered in the Hamptons. Jack had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Baltimore, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a textile factory. They'd met at a charity gala 12 years ago. Leanne had been volunteering. Jack had been providing security analysis for the event, one of his early private consulting gigs after leaving the agency. She'd laughed at his jokes, and he'd been captivated by her warmth. By the way, she seemed genuinely interested in people's stories rather than their status. Russell had opposed the marriage from the start. He'd run background checks, hired investigators, done everything short of threatening Jack's life to drive him away. When that failed, he'd simply treated Jack as an employee rather than family, always reminding him that the house they lived in, the cars they drove, even the education Danny received came from Avila money. Jack had tolerated it for Leanne's sake. For Danny's sake. Now Danny was gone, and Jack's tolerance had died with him. The reception after the funeral was a blur of casseroles and condolences. Jack stood in the corner of the living room, nursing a whiskey he didn't taste, watching the parade of Russell's associates pay their respects. He recognized most of them. Brett Fitzgerald, Russell's business partner, a thin man with nervous eyes and a habit of checking his phone every 30 seconds. Marco Owens, the site foreman at Meridian Heights, built like a linebacker with hands rough as sandpaper. Milton Montgomery, Russell's lawyer, whose oily smile never quite reached his eyes. Jack cataloged each face, each interaction. Old habits died hard. Jack, a woman's voice, gentle and hesitant. I'm so sorry. He turned to find Faith Melton, Danny's second-grade teacher, her eyes red-rimmed. She was a small woman in her 30s, with kind features and an earnest manner that reminded Jack of his mother. Thank you for coming, Faith. She glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. I need to tell you something. About Danny. But not here. Jack's instincts sharpened. What is it? The week before it happened, Danny was acting strange. Scared. He drew a picture in class. She pressed a folded paper into his hand. I found it in his desk. I thought you should have it. Before Jack could respond, Russell appeared at his elbow, his smile fixed and possessive. Faith, how kind of you to come. Jack, Leanne's looking for you. Faith retreated with a murmured goodbye. Jack slipped the paper into his pocket and followed Russell across the room, noting the subtle tension in his father-in-law's shoulders, the way his eyes tracked Faith's departure. Later that night, alone in Danny's room, Jack unfolded the paper Faith had given him. It was a crayon drawing, the kind any 7-year-old might make. But this one made Jack's blood run cold. Danny had drawn 2 figures, one large, one small. The large figure had silver hair, Russell's distinctive silver hair, and was holding something that looked like a briefcase near a building. The small figure, clearly meant to be Danny himself, was hiding behind a pillar, watching. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, Danny had written, "Grandpa's secret. Don't tell." Jack stared at the drawing for a long time, his mind racing. Danny had seen something. Something at one of Russell's construction sites. Something Russell didn't want anyone to know about. Jack pulled out his laptop and began to dig into Meridian Heights. The project had been plagued by delays and cost overruns, the kind of problems that could sink a development. Insurance claims had been filed repeatedly. Equipment theft, storm damage, vandalism, all conveniently covered. A pattern emerged. Over the past 5 years, every major Avila construction project had suffered similar misfortunes. Millions in insurance payouts. And every claim had been processed by the same adjuster at Heritage Pacific Insurance, Gloria Dalton. Jack knew insurance fraud when he saw it. Russell had been staging accidents, filing false claims, and using the money to cover his overruns. It was sophisticated, methodical, and incredibly profitable. And Danny had stumbled onto evidence of it. Jack closed his laptop, his hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. His son had died because he'd witnessed something he shouldn't have. Russell Avila, his own grandfather, had ordered his murder to protect a fraud scheme. The police wouldn't help. Detective Hector Gillespie, who'd closed the case, was a regular at Russell's poker games. The justice system was a closed door. But Jack had other skills. 15 years in the CIA had taught him that justice came in many forms, and the most effective kind rarely involved courtrooms. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in 3 years. "Willie," he said when the line connected. "I need your help. Someone killed my son, and I'm going to make them pay." Willie Conrad arrived 2 days later, appearing at Jack's door like a ghost from another life. He was a lean black man in his 50s, with gray-flecked stubble and eyes that had seen the worst of humanity and somehow kept their warmth. They'd worked together in Yemen, in the Philippines, in places that didn't officially exist. Willie was a tech specialist, surveillance, communications, the digital architecture of intelligence operations. "You look like hell," Willie said, embracing Jack. "Tell me everything." They sat in Jack's home office, the door locked, while Jack laid out what he'd discovered. The insurance fraud, Danny's drawing, the suspicious injuries, Russell's network of accomplices. Willie listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. "The fraud is real," Willie said when Jack finished. "I ran some preliminary searches on the flight here. Avila Construction has filed 17 major insurance claims in 5 years. Average payout, $2.3 million. That's nearly $40 million in fraudulent claims. And my son died to protect that. The question is who actually killed Danny. Russell wouldn't get his hands dirty. He'd use a proxy." Jack nodded. "Marco Owens. He's the site foreman at Meridian Heights. He was the one who found Danny's body. Called it in himself. Convenient. Too convenient." Jack pulled up a photograph on his laptop. Marco Owens, caught mid-stride at the funeral, his thick hands shoved in his pockets. I watched him at the reception. He couldn't look at me. Kept sweating despite the cold. Guilt or fear. Marco's the weak link. He's done Russell's dirty work for years, but he's not a killer by nature. He was probably told to scare Danny, keep him quiet. Things went wrong. Willie leaned back. So what's the play? We could take this to the feds. Insurance fraud is their jurisdiction. And watch Russell's lawyers tie it up for years while he walks free? Jack shook his head. No, I don't want him in prison. I want him destroyed. His reputation, his empire, his freedom, everything. And then I want 30 minutes alone with Marco Owens. Willie studied his old friend. Jack, I've seen you interrogate warlords and terrorists without flinching. But this is personal. Personal gets messy. You think I don't know that? Jack's voice was soft, but carrying an edge that could cut steel. My son called me from school the week before he died. He wanted to tell me something, he said. Something scary. And I told him we'd talk when I got home from my business trip. I told him it could wait. He looked at Willie, and for the first time, the mask slipped. Behind the cold precision was a father's grief, vast and oceanic. I made him wait, and now he's dead. So no, Willie, this isn't going to be clean. This is going to be biblical. The first step was surveillance. Jack and Willie spent a week mapping Russell's world, his routines, his associates, his vulnerabilities. They bugged his office, cloned his phone, and installed cameras in his car. Modern intelligence work was less about interrogation rooms and more about data, patterns of behavior, networks of connection, the invisible threads that bound people together. What they discovered confirmed Jack's suspicions and revealed new depths of corruption. Russell's insurance fraud was just the foundation. Brett Fitzgerald, his business partner, had been cooking the books for a decade, funneling money into offshore accounts. Milton Montgomery, the lawyer, had bribed city officials to expedite permits and overlook code violations. Gloria Dalton, the insurance adjuster, received monthly payments to a Cayman Islands account in exchange for approving every claim Russell submitted. And Detective Hector Gillespie, who'd closed Danny's case as an accident, had received a $50,000 consulting fee from Avila Construction 3 days after the funeral. It was a web of corruption spanning the city's power structure, and Russell Avila sat at its center like a spider. This is bigger than one kid, Willie observed. If this network goes down, it takes half the city's elite with it. Good. Jack studied the web of connections they'd mapped on his wall. Russell values his power, his reputation, his legacy. Those are his pressure points. We're going to attack them all. And Marco? Jack's expression hardened. Marco's the endgame. First, we dismantle Russell's world around him. We take away his money, his allies, his options. We make him desperate. And then, when he's cornered, he'll give me Marco to save himself. You sure about that? Russell Avila has never loved anyone more than himself. Not his daughter. Not his grandson. Certainly not some foreman he hired 20 years ago. Jack smiled, and there was nothing pleasant in it. When the walls close in, Russell will sacrifice anyone to survive. And I'll be there waiting. Jack began with the weakest link, Gloria Dalton. She was a woman in her 40s, divorced, with expensive tastes and mounting debts. Her condo was mortgaged to the hilt, her credit cards maxed out, her lifestyle far beyond her adjuster salary. Russell's bribes were the only thing keeping her afloat. Jack approached her in the parking garage of her building, appearing from the shadows like a nightmare made flesh. Gloria Dalton. His voice echoed off the concrete. We need to talk about Heritage Pacific's fraudulent claims processing. She dropped her keys, her face going pale. Who the hell are you? Someone who knows about your arrangement with Russell Avila. The monthly payments. The approved claims. The $17 million you've personally certified in the last 5 years. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I also know you have a daughter at Stanford. Expensive school. Will be a shame if the tuition checks stop coming. Gloria pressed herself against her car. Is this a shakedown? I'll give you whatever you want. Just please. I don't want money. Jack produced a folder and placed it on her car hood. This is a sworn affidavit detailing every fraudulent claim you've approved. You're going to sign it, and then you're going to wear a wire when you meet Russell next Tuesday to collect your payment. He'll kill me. Russell doesn't kill people himself. He has people do it for him. Jack's voice dropped to a whisper. People like Marco Owens. You know Marco, don't you? Big man. Rough hands. The same hands that beat my 7-year-old son before throwing him off a building. Gloria's hand flew to her mouth. Oh God, The boy at Meridian Heights. That was my son. His name was Danny. He liked dinosaurs and wanted to be an astronaut. Jack's composure cracked for just a moment before reforming. So you can understand why I'm not interested in polite negotiations. You help me destroy Russell, or I destroy you. Your choice. She signed the affidavit with trembling hands. 2 weeks later, Gloria met Russell at his office wearing a wire. Their conversation provided everything Jack needed. Explicit acknowledgement of the fraud scheme, references to other participants, and, most importantly, Russell's casual mention of cleaning up the situation at Meridian Heights. The boy was snooping, Russell said on the recording, his voice as casual as if discussing the weather. Marco handled it. Messy, but necessary. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs. Jack listened to those words alone in his office, playing them over and over until he had them memorized. His son had been an egg to break, an inconvenience to handle. He didn't feel rage anymore. That had burned out, leaving something colder and more focused behind. He felt clarity. He downloaded the recording to a secure drive and prepared for the next phase. The dismantling of Russell Avila's empire began quietly. First, Willie leaked the insurance fraud evidence to a financial journalist at the city's major newspaper. The story broke on a Sunday morning, complete with documentation, named sources, and references to pending federal investigations. Heritage Pacific immediately launched an internal audit. 3 of Russell's biggest projects were frozen pending review. Brett Fitzgerald, seeing the writing on the wall, hired his own lawyer and began negotiating with prosecutors. His testimony implicated Russell in tax evasion, bid rigging, and bribery. Milton Montgomery, the fixer, fled to Costa Rica on a private jet, only to find that his bank accounts had been mysteriously frozen. He was arrested at the airport in San Jose, extradited, and offered a deal: testify against Russell or face 30 years for corruption. The dominoes fell one by one, and Russell watched helplessly as his empire crumbled. But Jack wasn't finished. The recording of Russell's confession went viral 3 days later, uploaded anonymously to every social media platform. News networks ran it on a loop. Russell Avila, pillar of the community, casually discussing the murder of his 7-year-old grandson as a business necessity. The public reaction was volcanic. Protesters gathered outside Avila Construction headquarters. Investors pulled their money. The mayor, who'd attended Russell's charity galas, issued a statement expressing shock and dismay, while distancing himself as fast as possible. Detective Hector Gillespie, exposed as corrupt, was suspended pending investigation. The Danny Reese case was reopened by a different department. And through it all, Jack watched from the shadows, waiting for the right moment. It came on a Thursday evening when Russell's lawyer called with news. Prosecutors were offering a deal: full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. They wanted Marco Owens, the trigger man, and they were willing to let Russell plead to lesser charges if he delivered. Jack had known Russell would sacrifice his own mother to survive. He'd counted on it, but he had one more card to play. Leanne came to Jack on the night before Russell was scheduled to make his deal. She found him in his office, surrounded by documents and photographs. The evidence of her father's crimes spread across every surface. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Did my father really?" "Danny." Jack looked at his wife, the woman he'd loved for 12 years, the mother of his murdered child, and saw the agony in her eyes. Whatever else Leanne was, she'd adored Danny. That much had always been real. "Yes," he said simply. "Your father had Marco Owens kill our son because Danny saw something he shouldn't have. Insurance fraud. Millions of dollars. Our boy died for money." Leanne collapsed into a chair, shaking. "I didn't know. You have to believe me, Jack. I didn't know." "I know you didn't." Jack crossed to her, kneeling so their eyes were level. "But I need to know something now, Leanne. When the prosecutors offer your father a deal tomorrow, when he tries to pin everything on Marco to save himself, where will you stand?" She looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to make a choice. Your father or your son. Because I'm not letting Russell walk away from this with a slap on the wrist. I'm going to take everything from him. And then I'm going to get the man who actually put his hands on Danny. Marco. Marco." Jack's voice was ice. Your father will give him up to save himself. The prosecutors will take the deal. And I will make sure Marco Owens never hurts another child as long as he lives. Leanne was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached into her purse and produced a USB drive. I found this in my father's safe, she said. Financial records, communications, everything he's been hiding for 20 years. She pressed it into Jack's hand. Burn him. Burn it all. For Danny. Jack looked at his wife with something that might have been respect. She wasn't innocent. She'd benefited from her father's money for years, chosen to look the other way when the signs were there. But in this moment, when it mattered most, she'd chosen her son. Go pack a bag, he told her. Stay at your sister's tonight. Things are going to get ugly, and you don't want to be anywhere near your father when they do. She nodded, rising. At the door, she paused. Jack, whatever happens to Marco, make it count. I intend to. The federal prosecutors thought they were running the show. Special Agent Donna Church led the task force, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for bringing down white-collar criminals. She had Gloria Dalton's testimony, Brett Fitzgerald's cooperation, and enough documentation to bury Russell Avila for decades. But Jack had already been 3 steps ahead. The USB drive Leanne had provided contained a treasure trove, records of payments to Judge Kenneth Riddle, who'd quashed 2 prior investigations into Avila construction, evidence of a scheme to defraud pension funds. And most damning of all, communications between Russell and Marco Owens in the days leading up to Danny's death. The messages were damning. Russell ordering Marco to handle the situation at Meridian Heights. Marco confirming the kid saw the papers in the trailer. Russell's response, no witnesses, whatever it takes. Make it look accidental. Jack forwarded everything to Agent Church anonymously, then sat back to watch the chaos unfold. The arrest came at dawn. 30 federal agents surrounded the Avila estate, while helicopters circled overhead. Television crews captured Russell in handcuffs, his silver hair disheveled, his face a mask of disbelief. Marco Owens was arrested at his apartment simultaneously. He came out swinging, putting 2 agents in the hospital before being subdued. Jack watched the footage with cold satisfaction, noting Marco's size, his raw strength, the violence coiled in his thick frame. This was a man who'd killed Danny, who'd used those hands to beat a 7-year-old boy, then thrown him to his death. Jack had special plans for Marco Owens. The trial preparations began immediately. Russell, facing life in prison, hired a team of the best defense attorneys money could buy. They filed motions to suppress evidence, challenged the wiretaps, attacked the credibility of every witness. But the recordings were devastating. Russell's own voice, discussing the murder of his grandson like a business transaction. No jury in the world would acquit him. Still, Jack knew the legal system's limitations. Russell might get life, but he'd live out his days in a minimum security facility, playing tennis and writing memoirs. Marco might get 20 years, eligible for parole in 12. They'd both keep breathing while Danny moldered in his grave. Jack wanted more. He wanted them to suffer the way Danny had suffered. The way Jack suffered every night when he dreamed of his son's final moments. And he knew exactly how to get it. Willie had been watching Marco's communications since the arrest. The big man was scared, not of prison, but of what might happen before he got there. Russell was pressuring him through intermediaries to keep his mouth shut, promising legal support, threatening consequences if Marco cooperated with prosecutors. Marco's not loyal, Willie observed. He's scared. There's a difference. Can you give me access to it? Willie raised an eyebrow. He's in federal custody, awaiting trial. Maximum security. Even for us, that's a heavy lift. I don't need direct access. Jack smiled thinly. I just need to talk to him. Face to face, no guards, no lawyers. 30 minutes. What are you planning? Marco's going to confess. On camera. Every detail of what he did to Danny. And then he's going to testify against Russell in exchange for protective custody. And if he refuses? Jack's expression didn't change. He won't refuse. I've been studying Marco for weeks. His psychology, his fears, his pressure points. He's a bully, Willie. Big and strong, and used to intimidating people smaller than him. Men like that fall apart when they face someone they can't intimidate. And that someone is you. I broke Al-Qaeda operatives who've been trained since childhood to resist interrogation. Marco Owens is a thug with a high school education and a guilty conscience. He'll give me everything I want inside of 15 minutes. Willie studied his friend for a long moment. And the other 15? Jack's silence was answer enough. Getting to Marco required leverage, and leverage meant compromising someone in the system. Jack found his target in Sergio Potts, a corrections officer at the Federal Detention Center. Potts had gambling debts, a taste for cocaine, and a mistress who was threatening to tell his wife. He was exactly the kind of man Jack had exploited dozens of times in his career. Him in a parking lot behind a strip mall, far from cameras or witnesses. $20,000, Jack said, sliding an envelope across the hood of Potts's car. Cash. Enough to clear your debts and keep your girlfriend happy for another 6 months. Potts licked his lips nervously. What do I have to do? Marco Owens. Cell Block D. Tomorrow night, between 10 and 11 p.m., you're going to have a medical emergency that requires evacuation of the cell block. 20 minutes. That's all I need. Jesus. You're going to kill him. If I wanted him dead, he'd already be dead. Jack's voice was patient, almost gentle. I want to talk to him. Ask him some questions. You don't need to know what about, and you're going to forget this conversation ever happened. Potts hesitated, the envelope heavy in his hands. Jack could see him calculating the risk of getting caught, the certainty of his debts crushing him if he didn't take the money. 30,000, Potts said finally, and I want it in advance. Done. At 10:15 p.m. the following night, a fire alarm blared in cell block D. Guards evacuated prisoners to a secondary holding area while maintenance teams investigated. In the confusion, one cell remained occupied. Marco Owens, handcuffed to his bunk per special security protocols. Jack entered through a service door, wearing a guard's uniform and carrying a black duffel bag. The cameras in this section had been disabled for maintenance, Willie's work. He had exactly 18 minutes before the evacuation ended. Marco looked up when the cell door opened, his small eyes narrowing. Who the hell are you? My name is Jack Reese. He watched recognition dawn in Marco's face, watched the big man's confidence curdle into fear. You killed my son. Marco's hands strained against the cuffs. That was an accident. The kid fell. I wasn't even. Don't. Jack's voice was quiet, but it stopped Marco mid-sentence. I've heard your voice on the recordings. I've seen the bruises on my son's body, the defensive wounds on his arms, the pattern of injuries that tell me exactly what happened in that building. He stepped closer, and Marco pressed back against the wall. You grabbed him by the wrists. He struggled. He was a strong kid, always fighting with his buddies at school. So you hit him. Not once. Multiple times. Probably told yourself you were just scaring him, keeping him quiet. But you're a big man, Marco. You don't know your own strength. Jack's voice remained calm, almost conversational. By the time you realized you'd hurt him badly, it was too late. He was crying, bleeding, maybe calling for his dad. So you panicked, threw him off the building to make it look like an accident. And then you called it in yourself, the concerned foreman who found a tragic scene. Marco was shaking now, sweat beading on his forehead. It wasn't my fault. Russell said. I know what Russell said. Jack sat down on the bed, close enough to Marco that the big man could feel his presence like a physical weight. Russell's going to prison for the rest of his life. But he's also going to do everything he can to push the blame onto you. That's who he is. He sacrifices other people to save himself. He promised he'd take care of me. Give me a good lawyer. Make sure His lawyers are already building a case that paints you as a rogue employee, acting without authorization. They're going to say Russell never ordered Danny's death, that you overreacted to a minor problem and tried to cover it up. Jack watched Marco's expression shift from fear to betrayal. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison, Marco. And Russell's going to walk away with a reduced sentence and a story that makes him a victim of your incompetence. That's not. He can't do that. He told me to handle it. He said no witnesses. I believe you. Jack's voice softened. But no one else will. Russell's rich, connected, persuasive. You're a foreman with a criminal record. Who do you think the jury's going to believe? Marco stared at him, understanding slowly dawning. What do you want? Jack reached into his duffel bag and produced a video camera. I want the truth. On tape. Every detail of what happened that night. What Russell ordered, what you did, everything. In exchange, I'll make sure the prosecutors hear your story first. They'll put you in protective custody, work out a deal. You'll still do time, but you'll survive it. And if I refuse? Jack's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, a glimpse of the man who'd operated in black sites, who'd broken hardened killers with nothing but time and technique. Then I walk out of here, and the next person who visits your cell won't be interested in conversation. Russell has plenty of money and plenty of connections, even from prison. How long do you think you'll last once he decides you're a liability? The silence stretched. Marco's breathing was ragged, his eyes darting around the cell as if looking for escape. There was none. Okay, he said finally, his voice breaking. Okay, I'll tell you everything. Jack turned on the camera. Marco's confession took 12 minutes. Every detail emerged under Jack's patient questioning. Russell's orders, the encounter with Danny at the construction site, the escalating violence, the final act. Danny had been riding his bike past the site when he'd noticed activity in the supposedly closed trailer office. Curious, he'd snuck in and found Marco and Russell examining what appeared to be damaged equipment. Equipment that was being staged for an insurance claim. Danny had taken pictures with his phone before Marco spotted him. Russell had panicked. The pictures could expose everything. He'd ordered Marco to make sure the kid stays quiet while he deleted the images from Danny's phone. But Danny had struggled, bitten Marco's hand, tried to run. I just meant to grab him, Marco said on the video, tears streaming down his face. Hold him still while Russell figured out what to do. But he kept fighting, and I lost my temper. When I realized how bad it was, Russell said we had to finish it. Make it look like an accident. Whose idea was it to throw him from a building? Marco's face crumpled. Russell's. He said it had to look right. Like the kid just fell while sneaking around. He made me carry Danny up to the 4th floor. The boy was still conscious. He kept asking for his dad. Jack's hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. And then, Russell pushed him. So I didn't have the guts to do it myself, so he did it. Marco looked up, his eyes desperate. I know that doesn't make it better. I know I'm going to hell for this. But it was Russell who did the final thing. Jack stopped the recording. For a long moment, he just sat there, processing what he'd heard. Russell hadn't just ordered the murder. He'd performed it himself. Pushed his own grandson to his death to protect his empire. There's one more thing, Jack said quietly. When you carried Danny up those stairs, did he say anything else? Anything at all? Marco's face twisted with anguish. He said to tell his daddy he was sorry. He said he should have told you about the scary things sooner. Jack closed his eyes. The confession changed everything. Jack delivered the video to Agent Church anonymously, along with additional evidence from Leanne's USB drive. The prosecution's case against Russell transformed from serious to devastating. Not only had he ordered the murder, he'd participated directly. The death penalty was on the table. But Jack wasn't satisfied with the possibility of a lethal injection 20 years from now, after endless appeals and legal maneuvering. He wanted Russell to suffer now, to lose everything he valued before losing his life. And he knew exactly how to make that happen. Russell Avila made bail, $10 million, the last of his liquid assets after the bank accounts had been seized. His lawyers were mounting an aggressive defense, claiming the confession had been coerced, the evidence fabricated. A trial date was set for 6 months away. But Russell's real concern wasn't the trial. It was the mounting pressure from every direction. His business was gone, assets frozen pending civil forfeiture. His reputation was destroyed, his name synonymous with child murder. His wife of 40 years, Paulette, who'd always suspected his affairs but never imagined worse, had filed for divorce and was cooperating with prosecutors. His daughter Leanne had publicly disowned him, appearing on national television to condemn her father's actions. He was alone, reviled, and running out of options, which was exactly when Jack decided to pay him a visit. Russell was staying at a hotel downtown, a far cry from his sprawling estate. When Jack knocked on his door, the old man answered in a bathrobe, his silver hair unwashed, a glass of scotch trembling in his hand. "You." Russell's voice was hoarse. "Come to gloat." "May I come in?" Russell stepped aside, too exhausted to resist. The hotel room was littered with legal documents, empty bottles, and the detritus of a life in collapse. "You did this," Russell said, sinking into a chair. "The leaks, the witnesses, the whole damn thing. I should have known when Leanne turned on me. You did this to yourself." Jack remained standing, his posture relaxed, but his eyes never leaving Russell's face. "I just made sure the truth came out." "Truth?" Russell laughed bitterly. "You want truth? That boy was going to destroy everything I'd built over 40 years. Everything I'd sacrificed for, worked for. One stupid kid with a cell phone. He was your grandson. He was a liability." Russell's face hardened. "You never understood that, Reese. You never understood what it takes to build something. The compromises, the calculations. Danny was unfortunate, but he was going to ruin me." Jack felt the familiar coldness settling over him, the detachment that had allowed him to function in the darkest circumstances. "So you push him off a building. Your own blood. I protected my legacy. Your legacy is ashes." Jack leaned forward. "Your empire is dismantled. Your name is poison. Your wife is gone. Your daughter despises you. And the world knows you murdered a 7-year-old boy for money. In 6 months, you'll be convicted and sentenced to death. And even if you somehow escape that needle, you'll die alone and forgotten, knowing that everything you built was reduced to nothing." Russell stared at him, and for the first time, Jack saw real fear in the old man's eyes. Not the fear of death, but the fear of irrelevance, of having lived a life that meant nothing. "What do you want?" Russell whispered. "Why are you here?" Jack reached into his jacket and produced a photograph. Danny's school picture, taken 3 weeks before his death. A boy with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin, grinning at the camera like he had all the time in the world. "I want you to look at him," Jack said. "Really look. This is the boy you killed. His name was Danny Reese. He liked dinosaurs and baseball, and I'm making up stories about space explorers. He was afraid of thunderstorms, and he still believed in Santa Claus. He had his whole life ahead of him, and you took it because he accidentally saw you committing insurance fraud." Russell looked at the photograph, and something shifted in his face. A crack in the armor of self-justification. "I want you to see him every time you close your eyes," Jack continued. "I want him to be the last thing you think about before you die. And I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure his memory endures while yours is erased. There will be scholarships in his name, foundations, charitable works. Danny Reese will be remembered as an innocent child whose death exposed corruption and led to reforms. Russell Avila will be a footnote, a cautionary tale about what happens when greed consumes a man's humanity." He turned and walked to the door. At the threshold, he paused. "One more thing. The prosecutors are going to offer you a deal tomorrow. Life without parole in exchange for a guilty plea. Take it, because if you force a trial, I'll make sure every detail of your crimes is broadcast worldwide. I'll destroy whatever shreds of dignity you have left. And I'll do it with a smile on my face." He left Russell sitting in the debris of his ruined life, clutching a photograph of the grandson he'd murdered. Russell took the deal. The news broke on a Wednesday morning. Russell Avila had pled guilty to first-degree murder, insurance fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole to be served in a maximum security facility in the Arizona desert. The city exhaled. Justice had been served. But for Jack, the story wasn't over. Marco Owens was housed in a different facility, awaiting his own sentencing after testifying against Russell. His cooperation had earned him a recommendation for leniency, 20 years instead of life, with the possibility of parole in 15. Jack found this unacceptable. Marco had carried Danny up those stairs. Marco had held him down while Danny begged for his father. Marco had watched Russell push a 7-year-old boy to his death and said nothing. 20 years wasn't justice. It was a transaction. 3 weeks after Russell's sentencing, Jack submitted a victim impact statement to the court handling Marco's case. It was 20 pages long, meticulously detailed, outlining the psychological and emotional devastation of losing a child to violence. It was also, entirely legitimately, a request for permission to address the court at sentencing. The judge granted the request. The courtroom was packed on the day of Marco's sentencing. Media, advocates, curious spectators, everyone wanted to see the father of the murdered boy confront his son's killer. Marco sat at the defense table, smaller somehow than he'd seemed in that prison cell. The months since his arrest had worn him down. His massive frame seemed to have collapsed inward, as if the weight of his guilt was physically crushing him. When Jack took the podium, the room went silent. "Your Honor," Jack began, "I'm not here to ask for vengeance. The law has already determined what Marco Owens deserved for his role in my son's death. What I want is for this court, and for Marco himself, to understand what was lost." He spoke for 20 minutes. About Danny's birth, his first steps, his first words. About the drawings he made, and the questions he asked, and the future he'd never have. About the empty chair at the breakfast table, the unworn Halloween costume, the baseball glove that would never be used again. He spoke about the moment he'd received the phone call, the trip to the morgue, the sight of his son's broken body, the weeks of investigation, the discovery of the truth, the realization that Danny's own grandfather had ordered his murder. And finally, he spoke directly to Marco. "You were there when my son died. You carried him up those stairs. You watched him cry and plead and call for me. And you did nothing." Jack's voice was steady, but the pain beneath it was unmistakable. "I want you to live with that. Every day, for the rest of your life, I want you to remember his face, his voice, his terror. I want it to be the first thing you think of when you wake up and the last thing you see before you sleep. Because that's what I live with. That's what his mother lives with. And it's only fair that you share our burden." He paused, collecting himself. "You asked me once in that cell what I wanted. I told you I wanted the truth. But that wasn't entirely accurate." Jack looked directly at Marco, and his eyes were cold as deep water. "What I really want is impossible. I want my son back. Since I can't have that, I'll settle for watching you spend the rest of your useful years in a cage, knowing that your cowardice and violence stole a child from the world. I hope you find peace eventually. I hope you make amends in whatever way you can. But I also hope you never forget what you did. Because I never will." He stepped down from the podium. The judge, visibly moved, sentenced Marco Owens to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 18. It was harsher than the prosecution had requested, harsher than anyone had expected. Marco wept as they led him away. Jack felt nothing. In the weeks that followed, Jack began the slow work of rebuilding his life. He established the Danny Reese Foundation, dedicated to child safety and anti-corruption advocacy. He worked with legislators to strengthen whistleblower protections, inspired by the idea that another child shouldn't have to die because they witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. He and Leanne tried to reconcile. There were therapy sessions, difficult conversations, attempts to find a new foundation for their marriage. Some days it felt possible. Other days, the ghost of what had happened stood between them like a wall. "I keep seeing him," Leanne said one night, as they sat on the porch of the house they were trying to make a home again. "In his room, on his bike, everywhere. I keep expecting him to come running around the corner." "I know. Does it ever get better?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if better is the right word. Different, maybe. You learn to carry it differently." She reached for his hand, and he let her take it. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where Danny had ridden his bike and played with his friends. 6 months later, Jack received word that Russell Avila had died in prison. Not from violence, though there had been several attempts on his life by inmates who took exception to child killers, but from a stroke. He'd collapsed in his cell on a Tuesday morning and was pronounced dead before the paramedics arrived. Jack felt the news settle over him like a cold blanket. He'd expected to feel something, satisfaction, perhaps, or closure. Instead, there was only a vast emptiness. Russell was dead. Marco was imprisoned. Justice, such as it was, had been served. But Danny was still gone. On the 1-year anniversary of Danny's death, Jack visited the grave alone. The headstone had weathered slightly, losing its pristine newness. Flowers wilted around its base. Leanne came twice a week to replace them. Jack hadn't been back since the funeral. He knelt in the grass, heedless of the mud staining his pants, and placed his palm flat on the stone. "Hey, buddy," he said quietly. "It's Dad." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. "I got them. Both of them. Russell's dead, and Marco's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. I know that doesn't bring you back. Nothing can bring you back. But I needed you to know that they didn't get away with it. That your death meant something." He was crying now, tears he hadn't allowed himself since the funeral. The armor he'd built, the cold precision that had carried him through the investigation and the trials, it all crumbled in the presence of his son's grave. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," he whispered. "I'm sorry I told you to wait. If I just listened, if I just come home when you called." The grief rolled over him like a wave, and he let it. For the first time in a year, he let himself feel the full weight of his loss. When the storm passed, he was empty, hollowed out, but also somehow lighter. "I'm going to keep going," he told the headstone. "The foundation, the advocacy work, all of it. I'm going to make sure other kids are protected the way I couldn't protect you. And someday, not soon, but someday I'm going to be okay. Not happy maybe, but okay." He stood, brushing the dirt from his knees. "I love you, Danny. I'll love you every day until I die. And when I do, I'm going to find you, wherever you are, and we're going to play catch until our arms fall off. That's a promise." He walked away from the grave, into a future he couldn't predict. Behind him, the wind stirred the flowers at the base of the headstone, carrying the scent of spring. 1 year later, Jack Reese stood at a podium in the state capitol, addressing a crowd of legislators, advocates, and journalists. Behind him, a banner read, "The Danny Reese Child Protection ACT. When my son was killed," he began, "I wanted vengeance. I wanted to destroy the people who'd taken him from me, and I did. But vengeance doesn't fill the void. It doesn't bring back what you've lost." He paused, scanning the crowd. "What is help? What makes the pain bearable is meaning. Knowing that your loved one's death wasn't in vain, that their memory can protect others from suffering the same fate." The bill he was championing would require enhanced security at construction sites, stricter whistleblower protections, and mandatory reporting of suspicious deaths. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Danny Reese was 7 years old, Jack included. He wanted to be an astronaut. He loved dinosaurs and baseball and making up stories. He was killed because he witnessed something he shouldn't have, and the people who killed him thought they could get away with it. He looked directly into the cameras. They were wrong. And today, we're making sure that the next time a child sees something they shouldn't, they're protected. That their voice is heard. That their life matters. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, Leanne found him in the hallway, her eyes bright with tears. "Danny will be proud of you," she said. Jack pulled her into an embrace. "I hope so." They walked out together, into the sunlight, into whatever future awaited them. The ghost of their son walked with them, always present, never truly gone. But now, at least, his memory was a blessing rather than only a wound. And that, Jack thought, was the closest thing to peace he would ever find. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.